A man is walking through the west wing of the White House. It is 1:15 p.m. on March 22nd, 1962. He is 67 years old. He has been director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 38 years. In 15 minutes, he will be seated across from the youngest president ever elected in the United States. There will be no aide in the room, no recording device, no witness. The lunch is blocked on the official White House diary with a single line. Lunch with Director Hoover, no subject listed, no agenda attached. The meeting lasts 4 hours. When it ends, the president returns to his private quarters and places one final phone call. It is to a woman named Judith Campbell. The affair ends that evening. The White House phone logs, later released, show no further contact between them for the remainder of his life. Campbell was at that time simultaneously involved with a man named Sam Giancana, a senior figure in the Chicago outfit. The Bureau had the file on her. The director had just told the president what was in it. The president did not fire him. No president ever did. J. Edgar Hoover was appointed director of the Bureau of Investigation on May the 10th, 1924. He was 29 years old. The man who appointed him was Attorney General Harlan Fiske Stone. Hoover would hold the position for the next 48 years. He would serve under 8 presidents, from Calvin Coolidge to Richard Nixon. He was never confirmed by the Senate. He was never voted on. He was appointed once, in 1924, and he died in office in 1972. No director of any federal agency in American history has ever held power for longer. The bureau he built became the FBI in 1935. It grew to more than 20,000 employees. It acquired a laboratory, a national fingerprint registry, a central filing system, and jurisdiction in every state. It also acquired something else. Beginning in 1924, within Hoover's own office, separate from the Bureau's central records, a parallel filing system began to appear. He called it official and confidential. By the time he died, it contained 164 folders. Those folders were not stored with the rest of the Bureau's records. They were kept in the outer office where his personal secretary sat. The official and confidential files contained material Hoover decided was too sensitive for the central system. Sensitive in this context did not mean classified in the conventional sense. It meant personal. Sexual conduct, financial arrangements, mental illness, intercepted correspondence, affairs, paternity, drugs. The subjects of these files included senators, congressmen, Supreme Court justices, cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, governors, actors, journalists, labor leaders, and every president of the United States who served during Hoover's tenure. None of them fired him. Harry Truman wrote in his private diary in 1945 that the FBI was becoming an American version of the Gestapo. He kept Hoover. John Kennedy told friends he wanted Hoover gone. He kept Hoover. Lyndon Johnson, pressed by aides on the same subject, said it was better to have him inside the tent than outside. Richard Nixon discussed firing him in recorded Oval Office meetings in 1971 and 1972. He did not do it. The question that defines the story is simple. Why could none of them, across 48 years, remove a man they all distrusted? The answer is also simple. The mechanism worked like this. The Bureau acquired the information through wiretaps, surveillance, informants, intercepted mail, and ordinary police files. The subject was then made aware, sometimes through intermediaries, that the Bureau had it. No explicit threat needed to be issued. The existence of the file was the instrument. This practice was not invented in the 1960s. A declassified FBI memo dated November 27, 1945, records Hoover personally briefing the newly sworn-in President Truman on compiled material concerning multiple political opponents. It had been operational for 2 decades by then. Attorney General Edward Levi testified before the United States Congress in February 1975 about what the personal and confidential files had contained. He was working from a surviving summary document. He told the Senate committee that the files included 48 folders. The folders covered public figures and prominent persons. Among them were presidents. executive branch employees, 17 individual members of Congress. The folders contained what Levi described only as derogatory information. By the time he testified, the specifics had been destroyed. What remained was the index. 48 folders, 17 congressmen. The Bureau did not only collect, it acted. Beginning in August 1956, a classified program operated out of Bureau headquarters under the name COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. Its stated purpose, in Hoover's own authorizing memoranda, was to disrupt, discredit, and neutralize groups considered threats to domestic security. Under Hoover's direct authority, it surveilled, infiltrated, and sabotaged civil rights organizations, anti-war movements, black political groups, and individual American citizens. It operated for 15 years. It was illegal. It was run from the desk of a man who could not be fired. The authorizations are in the declassified record. Memoranda signed by Hoover personally, directives sent to field offices across the country, language about neutralizing named individuals. One of those individuals was Martin Luther King, another was Malcolm X, another was Fred Hampton. What happened to them is a matter of public record. What happened to the others, the ones whose names are less familiar, is also a matter of public record. It is in the operational files that still exist at the National Archives. Anyone can request them. They are indexed. They are searchable. What was not filed with the central records, what was kept upstairs in the director's suite, was the personal material, the leverage, the content of those 48 folders, the individual names, the specific indiscretions. For 48 years, the Bureau operated a domestic intelligence system with no external oversight, no confirmation process, and no political accountability, because the man running it possessed, on the men who might have restrained him, the information that would have ended their careers. One of the names held inside that system belonged to a man who had twice been chosen by his party to run for the presidency of the United States. His name was Adlai Stevenson. He had served as governor of Illinois. He had been the Democratic nominee for president in 1952 and again in 1956. He had lost both elections to Dwight Eisenhower. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed him United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Throughout this entire period, the FBI maintained material on him inside a separate archive called the Sex Deviates file. The file recorded unverified allegations concerning his private life. It had been active since the 1940s. Stevenson himself was never told it existed. The men who decided whether to act on it were Hoover and the sitting president. The Sex Deviates file was a bureau classification used to collect allegations about the private conduct of prominent Americans. At its peak, it held approximately 330,000 pages. Whether the allegations in any given entry were true was not the point. The allegation itself, held in a bureau folder, was the instrument. Historians working from surviving internal memoranda have established that Hoover's interest in the material was not forensic. It was operational. It was also institutional. The file sat inside the FBI through the administrations of Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. It was never audited by any external body. Adlai Stevenson collapsed on a pavement in Grosvenor Square, London, on the afternoon of July 14, 1965. He was 65 years old. He was still serving as ambassador to the United Nations. He had never held the presidency. The file the Bureau kept on him outlived him by 12 years. In 1977 and 1978, under internal FBI order, the Sex Deviates file was almost entirely destroyed. 330,000 pages were disposed of. One document survived. It is an index card. It carries Adlai Stevenson's name. It is the only fragment of that archive now held at the National Archives. The record it pointed to is gone. At approximately 8:30 a.m. on the morning of May 2nd, 1972, J. Edgar Hoover's housekeeper, Annie Fields, entered his bedroom at 4936 30th Place, Northwest, Washington, D.C. He was on the floor. He was 77 years old. He had died in the night. The chain of calls is documented in bureau records. The housekeeper called Hoover's physician. The physician called Clyde Tolson, the associate director of the FBI and Hoover's companion for more than 40 years. Tolson called Helen Gandy, Hoover's secretary. Within 1 hour, a bureau document called the D list was in circulation inside FBI headquarters. The D stood for destruction. Gandy was 75 years old. She had been Hoover's secretary for 54 years. She began work inside the director's office suite that same morning. The suite had an inner office, which Hoover used, and an outer office, where Gandy sat. Since 1957, the official and confidential files had been kept in the outer office. The following day, May 3rd, the newly appointed acting director of the FBI, L. Patrick Gray, entered the suite. Gandy paused her work and gave him a tour. He sealed the inner office. The inner office contained no files. The files were in the room he did not seal. Gray reported to President Nixon that the office had been secured. It had not been. On May 4th, Gandy transferred 12 boxes marked official and confidential to Mark Felt, the second-ranking official at the FBI. The boxes contained 167 files and 17,750 pages. Gray told reporters that afternoon there were no dossiers and no secret files at the Bureau. He said there were only general files and that he had taken steps to preserve their integrity. What he called general files were in fact the surviving half of the Blackmailed archive. They would eventually be released to the public. They were not the problem. The problem was the second set, the personal file. Gandy did not hand it over. She continued work in the office suite until May 12th. She then transferred 32 file drawers of material to Hoover's home. From May 13th to July 17th, 1972, she shredded the contents by hand in the basement recreation room at 4936 30th Place. The destruction was supervised by John P. Moore, the third-ranking official at the Bureau. The work took 65 days. No independent observer was ever present. The material destroyed in that basement is the material referenced in Edward Levy's 1975 testimony. Those 48 folders, those 17 members of Congress. Gandy later testified under oath before a House subcommittee. She said she had destroyed only personal papers. She said nothing official had been removed from the Bureau. Representative Andrew Maguire of New Jersey told her during her testimony that he found her account difficult to believe. She answered that this was his privilege. She was 78 years old at the time. She was never charged with any crime. The only other person who knew precisely what had been in those 32 file drawers was dead. But by the time Hoover died, the silence was already cracking. It had cracked 14 months earlier, 250 miles north of Washington, in a single evening. On the night of March 8, 1971, during the televised Muhammad Ali vs. Joe Frazier heavyweight title fight, 8 people forced the lock on the FBI's resident agency office in Media, Pennsylvania. They called themselves the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. They removed more than 1,000 documents. They mailed copies to 3 American newspapers. 2 of the newspapers returned the documents to the FBI unopened. The third was the Washington Post. The reporter at the Post was Betty Metzger. She read the documents. She published. Inside the stolen files was a word that had never appeared in public print before: COINTELPRO. The word was in an operational directive. The directive described a program to disrupt, discredit, and neutralize lawful political activity by American citizens. Follow-up reporting by Metzger and others over the next 4 years established the scope. The program had operated since August 1956. It had targeted the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and black political organizations. Hoover was still alive when the word went public. He had 14 months left. In January 1975, the United States Senate established a select committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. It was chaired by Senator Frank Church of Idaho. Over 15 months, The church committee subpoenaed bureau records, examined classified documents, and called witnesses. Among them was William Sullivan, the former assistant director of the FBI, who had personally run COINTELPRO for Hoover. Sullivan confirmed the operational directives. He confirmed the wiretaps. He confirmed the letter the Bureau had sent to Martin Luther King in 1964, urging him to commit suicide. He described his work without apparent remorse. Sullivan testified in 1975. He was scheduled to give further evidence in connected proceedings in late 1977. On the morning of November 9, 1977, while walking near his home in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, he was shot and killed. The shooter was a 22-year-old man who stated under questioning that he had mistaken Sullivan for a deer. The shooter was fined $500 for hunting without a license. No further charges were filed. No further investigation was conducted. Sullivan was 65. Portions of his private files on Bureau operations, which had been in his home at the time of his death, were reported missing afterwards. J. Edgar Hoover's body lay in state in the rotunda of the United States Capitol. It is an honor extended to fewer than 40 individuals in the history of the Republic. President Nixon delivered the eulogy. Flags on federal buildings across the country were lowered to half-staff. On May 4, 1972, 2 days after Hoover's death, Nixon signed Public Law 92-520. The law named the new FBI headquarters, still under construction on Pennsylvania Avenue, the J. Edgar Hoover Building. Helen Gandy lived another 16 years. She died in Florida in July 1988, aged 91. She was never interviewed on camera. She never wrote a book. She never spoke of the files again. The official and confidential files are at the National Archives, 164 folders. Any member of the public can request them. What Helen Gandy destroyed is not there. What she destroyed is not anywhere. Attorney General Edward Levi's 1975 testimony provides the only surviving partial index. 48 folders on prominent persons, 17 members of Congress, presidents, executive branch officials. What it does not provide is the content. The content was destroyed by a 75-year-old woman in a basement recreation room on 30th Place, Northwest, over 65 days in the summer of 1972. She took what she knew with her when she died. In December 2025, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced that the J. Edgar Hoover Building would close permanently. The Bureau is relocating 3 blocks west into the Ronald Reagan Building on Pennsylvania Avenue. The concrete structure that has stood on Pennsylvania Avenue for 50 years is being decommissioned. The sign bearing his name is coming down. The agency inside it will continue. Its current director is Kash Patel. Portions of its budget are public. The portions relating to domestic intelligence operations are not. The surviving files are open. The destroyed files will stay destroyed. The building will be empty soon. The archive is still active. This file is now unsealed. The vault has more. Subscribe and you'll be there when the next one opens.